If you are what you eat, then I am you. Chapter 1. Ending of Dreams. Could I forgive myself in the last months I have yet to live? Avery, a young man with white hair stopped short of his shoulders, had stepped out of the hospital. Dressed in a black turtleneck and denim jeans, his pale skin and prominent eye bags only added to his frail and malnourished appearance. Icy blue eyes gazed upon his surroundings. The tall buildings of New York, a tree lightly shifting in the wind, and a Walmart plastic bag tumbling through the streets. A deep sigh was followed by a numbing pain in Avery's chest. Dragging his feet, music from his worn-down earbuds drowned out the noise around him. First, he had to get out of the house, something he hated doing, before getting multiple shots at the doctors. When he thought this day really couldn't get any worse, light raindrops started to patter onto the sidewalk. He glanced at the gloomy sky and another droplet landing onto his nose and his eyelid. It wasn't long before the raindrops started to pelter. Shit! He began to run to a friend's house, despite the nurses and doctors heavily warning him not to. Doing things such as running and excessive exercise, the doctor said, would take a massive toll on his health. Avery didn't give one single shit and ran otherwise. Avery arrived at the house and hurriedly rang the doorbell, gasping for air. His legs cramped, urging him to lean against the concrete wall that was near the door. Come on, you fucker, I know you're home. At that moment, the door opened. The figure of a man stood in the doorway. He had blonde hair that was buzzed cut short on the sides and the back, but longer on the top of his head. His most distinct feature, however, were his numerous piercings and shark tattoo on his arm, along with plenty of other tattoos. The man seemed happy when he saw Avery. Oh, hey, Ray Ray. Wanna have a smoke? He seemed completely oblivious to the situation, given his carefree smile. Don't call me that, Silas. We need to talk. Avery's brows furrowed, his brows cutting like a blade. Silas, confused, invited Avery in. Your roommate isn't home, right? Avery asked. Silas shook his head. Nah, he's working overtime at his job or whatever. Avery gave a negligent glance before glaring at Silas. Avery, despite in the past having hung out with Silas a lot, had yet to even meet Silas's roommate. Silas's roommate was boring, according to him. Silas continued to chat. What did you want to talk about? He was surprisingly sober as of now. Let's stop being friends. Avery's sudden request of ceasing their relationship made Silas go speechless for a bit. What? Silas couldn't grasp the emotions he was feeling at the moment. Why? Why are you acting like this all of a sudden? Is there something going on? Avery did not look him in the eyes. I just don't like you at all as a friend. I never have. Avery forced himself to curve his lips into a smile, one full of insanity. Silas frowned, hurt by his words. So, that's it? We've been friends for 6 fucking years, Ray! Avery balled his fists, the corner of his mouth curving into a smile that masked his true feelings. Oh, how I despise you, he declared, an unsettling satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. To an outsider, he appeared on the brink of madness, yet deep within, an ache festered. Silas, bewildered by Avery's behavior, stared in confusion. In a flash of reckless impulse, Avery understood that mere words wouldn't drive Silas away. With a surge of frustration, he began to unleash chaos upon the room, determined to provoke a response. Silas' eyes widened. Hey! Hey man, stop! My roommate's gonna be pissed! He said, his voice slightly frantic as he watched Avery break the things he held dear. Silas stepped in to stop Avery, who tried backing away. He only collided with something, causing it to fall down and shatter into pieces. Avery's eyes widened in shock. He had just knocked over Silas's mother's urn. He didn't mean to break it, especially knowing how important it was to him. A heavy weight in his stomach, yet he refused to apologize. He understood that his actions had crossed a line significant to ignite Silas's hatred. And sure enough, that was the moment of Silas's breaking point. In a swift motion, Silas seized Avery by the wrist. Get the fuck out! Silas's voice echoed off the walls. Avery wore a frenzied grin that remained even as he was forcefully worn out. Thank you, he murmured to himself, struggling to regain his footing. Gradually, he found his balance, though the manic smile slipped from his lips, replaced by a veil of tears that threatened to spill. His hands began to tremble, and a tempest roared in his chest as his pulse quickened. Bewildered, he stared at his quivering palms, the world around him spinning in a dizzying blur. It felt as though his own body was rebelling against him. He inhaled deeply, seeking solace in the breaths, but the dizziness clung to him like a persistent shadow. As he trudged through the pouring rain, his apartment lay 3 miles ahead, just out of reach, and the absence of an Uber made the journey feel more daunting. He paused intermittently, allowing himself fleeting moments of rest, until finally he approached the door of his apartment. A jolt of alarm coursed through him as he noticed a piece of paper affixed to the door. However, as his eyes skimmed over its contents, the initial spark of curiosity faded into hollow despair, engulfing him once more in a sea of sorrowful emptiness. Eviction notice! Dear tenant, you are hereby given an eviction notice to leave the property within 30 days! The reason for this eviction notice is, 1. You have not paid the bills. LOL! Avery scoffed, crumpling the paper and throwing it onto the ground. As he entered his trashy apartment, he was greeted by his pet dog Moosh. She wagged her tail, panting. Avery petted her gently. This was the brightest part of his day. Grabbing the towel from his bathroom, Avery dried himself off with it and changed into dry clothes. Now sporting a comfortable black shirt and light-colored jeans, he set down his bag and immediately sat down, pulling out his cheap laptop. He began drafting an email to his college to announce his decision to drop out. After sending the message, he closed the laptop. Reaching into his bag, he retrieved a moldy sandwich wrapped in plastic. He had bought it to look normal in public, but now he didn't care about appearances. Disgusted, he tossed it into the trash. It had been 4 days since he last ate. The hospital had tried to force-feed him, but he quickly became ill. His lack of appetite wasn't about his appearance. Food simply revolted him. He looked at his own arm, several stitches through his pale white skin. His eyes were fixated on the stitches. The hospital warned him not to take the stitches out, since he had a bad habit of taking them out. He blinked and looked away. He clutched his chest where his heart was and let out a long, strained sigh. He grabbed a bottle of pills from his bag. They were big pills that helped him stabilize his health. Avery swallowed one of the pills with water, returned the bottle to his bag, then took some other prescribed medicine, feeling lightheaded from everything that just happened. His bag was stuffed with things like medications, papers, and a book. He picked up a blank sheet of lined notebook paper and a pen, then began jotting down a short list. His handwriting was absolute shit. He then pulled out his phone and opened his messages, sending a text in the group chat with both his mother and father. I'm dropping out of college. After sending the message, his phone started going off with notifications. Avery had cut off his best friend. Now his parents won't want anything to do with him. There was one more person for him to get rid of from his life, and that was his current girlfriend, Catalina. He hasn't seen her in a week, and she's quite irritated at him for ignoring her anyway. She was also very uptight over Avery quitting his job because of her. Avery questioned if he had even liked her in the first place. Maybe in the beginning. Avery thought to himself, his mind wandering into depths of regret. No, he had loved her all this time, until recently. He seemed to have lost any interest in others, even his loved ones. Although he thought about his mother's disappointed gaze on him, seeing him as he was now, and tears threatened to flow from his eyes as if a dam had broken open. But he bit back his emotions and he stayed quiet. It was overwhelmingly silent in the room. He felt like he might suffocate. Moosh! Avery's big, fluffy German Shepherd dog walked over to Avery, tail wagging. Avery smiled a bit and petted the dog on the head once more. You're a good girl, Moosh. His tone was a bit sad, but he quickly composed himself. Moosh could sense his sadness, and she laid her head on his lap. Avery felt his eyes sting with tears and hugged her tightly. Later that day, Avery made sure to take Moosh on a walk to the nearby park so she could do her business. Leaning on a bench, he let Moose go poo-poo, his mind filling with thoughts, mainly his girlfriend. His train of thought first went through all the good memories of Catalina, then the bad. There were quite a lot of bad ones, such as arguments, insults, misunderstandings. A lot started due to her. The two have been dating for about 7 months and have broken up twice in between. Avery planned to break up with her the next day, and this time he wishes to stay that way. But somewhere in his heart, it ached in despair. A place in his heart really did love her, but she never expressed any sort of love back unless they were getting intimate or when Avery was drunk. Suddenly, Avery was reeled back into reality with the sound of Moosh's loud barking. She was barking at another dog, and the two of them seemed excited. While Avery was calming Moosh down, the owner of the smaller dog walked over and apologized. Apparently their dog was the one who got Moosh riled up. Whatever, Avery answered, not sparing to look at the other person. The other person appeared to have long hair and seemed a bit confused. They attempted to engage Avery in conversation, but their overly cheerful demeanor was more than he could handle at the moment. Avery groaned and told the person to fuck off before walking away with Moosh, forgetting to clean up after her with the poo bags due to his annoyance. By the time they got back to his apartment, it had gotten darker. Avery relaxed for a few moments before deciding he wanted to take a bath. Avery walked slowly to the bathroom. There was a carpet near the sink that had multiple bloodstains on it. He approached the bathtub, shedding his clothes before settling into the cool, empty basin. He turned on the tap. Warm water cascaded gently, gradually enveloping him. He leaned back, hoping to find solace in the soothing embrace of the water, but instead felt the air close in around him, heavy and stifling. A tight knot formed in his stomach, a reminder of the gnawing hunger he couldn't ignore. He sat up, and he stared at his stitches once again. The look in his eyes was peculiar. He felt the need to rip them out. His hands started to tremble, and he felt overwhelmingly nauseous. He had forgotten to take some of his nighttime pills. He hated the sickly feeling. He needed something. His stomach ached in pain. He hated it. He hated it. He hated it! Trigger warning for gore. Before he could even think, He started to viciously bite at his stitches, ripping them out with his teeth. Blood gushed out immediately, and the big gashes out of his skin that the stitches were keeping together came tearing open. Blood dripped into the water, and tears formed in his eyes as he started to bite at his own arm. He bit at his skin, starting to cry from the relentless pain. Ripping some skin off with his teeth, he screamed in pain, but he couldn't help it. He needed to taste it. He couldn't stop himself. The blood tasted weird. The water in the tub turning crimson. Avery realized how much damage he caused. He became frantic as he rushed out of the bath, but then he slipped on the wet floor and hit the ground with a thud. Passing out, Moosh started barking loudly in worry. Avery's apartment neighbors who lived just below his apartment were used to this. He left his apartment door unlocked every night, which wasn't the smartest decision. They usually walked in, checking in on Avery. The neighbor found Avery and was shocked at how bad things were this time. It was also a bit embarrassing. Avery was lying unconscious on the floor, naked, bleeding out from his arm. The neighbor dialed for an ambulance, and Avery was once again brought to the hospital. Once Avery woke up, he was in a hospital bed, wires and IV tubes attached to his body, as well as fresh stitches in his arm. His arm was sore and hurt badly. His entire body ached as well, but he was used to this environment. There was a monitoring camera in the room, like this room was meant for Avery to be in. A doctor walked into the room, shutting the door behind him. He knew every doctor at the hospital by name. Avery smiled and played dumb. I slipped and my stitches popped out. The doctor knew right away that he was lying.
You need to stop. If this happens one more time, we will send you to a psych ward for a few months.
The doctor seemed fed up at this point. Avery shook his head, keeping the dumb, sweet smile he plastered. No need. Plus, I don't want to spend my last months in a fucking psych ward for neck's sake. The last few words mistakenly slipped out of his mouth. The doctor pretended he didn't hear.
You can leave tomorrow.
You can let me leave now. Come on, Doc. Avery whined and pleaded. His doctor just looked at the mess of a man that Avery was inside.
You may leave tomorrow.
Avery couldn't help but groan loudly.
One more thing. Your hospital bills aren't looking too great.
The doctor added, leaving the room without saying more. Avery furrowed his eyebrows. He looked at the monitoring camera and flipped it off, shouting a bit at the camera. Knowing that someone was watching, he eventually got tired of doing that and laid there, bored. He wasn't allowed to do almost anything, because the doctors didn't want him hurting himself. I'm not that stupid. If I were to hurt myself, why would I do it in a hospital? Avery scoffed. He felt extremely bored. He had nothing to do. It made him start to think. The more he was alone with his thoughts, the more insane he felt he was becoming. Sometime later, a female nurse comes in with some food. Avery wasn't even allowed to use normal utensils. He had to use some flabby, paper-like thing as a spoon. Of course, he refused to eat. The nurse tried her best to talk him into eating, but it was no use. The female nurse had a soothing voice and a nice body, but Avery was pissed off. He wanted to leave the hospital, feeling even more upset as he realized he forgot to feed Moosh. Eventually, the original doctor comes in.
You need to eat if you don't want your disease to kill you quicker.
To that, Avery laughed. You know I don't like eating this shit. It makes me sick. Avery threw the plate of food onto the ground, like a toddler throwing a tantrum. The doctor had to calm himself down before attempting to calm Avery down. You think I'm some deranged psychopath, don't you? You gossip with the nurses, am I right? Avery grinned, his blue eyes just adding to the deranged look of his face.
No, Avery, we don't think you're,
The doctor couldn't finish his sentence. He did indeed see Avery as a deranged man. Avery frowned. Fuck you! It was around 1 a.m. at this time. The doctor was fed up with Avery and gave up on him. He left the room, closing the door behind him. It wasn't long until Avery felt a stinging pain in his chest and hot tears going down his cheeks. What the fuck? He quickly wiped his tears away and laid back down properly. He curled up into the fetal position and hugged the pillow. He pressed the pillow against his face and yelled, before finally starting to calm down. At this point, he just wanted to sleep. He had to keep moving around a ton to finally find a comfortable enough position to sleep in. Eventually, he found a comfortable sleeping position for himself. Most of his limbs were hanging off the bed. He didn't care if the boogeyman got him. He felt absolutely exhausted and slept like a rock, and his blood stayed level throughout the night. The next morning, Avery woke up very early. He wanted to leave as soon as possible, although the doctors had to use a feeding tube to ensure Avery received nutrition. Avery was very disobedient. There were doctors around who made sure he didn't pass out as soon as he got out of bed. Avery's hands and legs were trembling slightly once he stood up, feeling lightheaded. He waited a few minutes before deciding to leave. It was still quite early when Avery exited the hospital. He slipped his silver rings back onto his fingers, thinking they added a touch of coolness to his look. It was the only item he had with him, having arrived at the hospital with no belongings or even clothes. Quite embarrassing. Once back at his apartment, which took some time, he checked his phone. The date was November 22nd, 8 a.m., and he had over 100 notifications, mostly from his parents and his girlfriend. He changed into a long-sleeved turtleneck and ripped jeans, grabbed his shoulder bag, and hurried out of the apartment. Maybe I can catch Catalina before she leaves for work and break things off. Catalina was the name of his girlfriend. He rushed down the sidewalks, heart racing. Office buildings were close to his apartment, so he didn't have to run far. Catalina had a professional job, although Avery had no idea how she was accepted. It was around that time she would have to go to work. He saw his girlfriend and yelled out to her, "Catalina! Cat!" His voice braked as he grasped for air. And yet again, he was running, straining for his heart and body. The woman looked back at him. This woman was very pretty on the outside, but her looks did not make up for her personality. She had pretty and smooth brown skin with dark hair, her lips all prettied and dolled up in pink. She had long eyelashes, but an unsavory attitude. "Ray, what are you doing here? You've been ignoring me all week. What the fuck is wrong with you? You also quit your job at the cafe. It's because of me, isn't it?" "Let's break up," he said bluntly, hiding his trembling hands behind his back. Catalina seemed shocked. She dropped her coffee dramatically. "What?" Her shout was so loud it could be heard from the other side of the block. Neighboring people turned to watch the scene escalate before them. This, of course, made Avery want to dig a hole and never see the light of day again. Catalina acted like a victim, although this whole relationship has been a trash fire where she makes everything about her, sometimes even insulting Avery on how his name sounds girly. "Cat, please don't make a scene." "I'm not the one making a scene!" Tears streamed down Catalina's face, resulting in more and more people watching the scene unfold before them. "You will always make a scene. All you like is fucking attention, and you even insult me frequently. You make everything about your fucking self. Then you threaten me if I mention taking a break or breaking up with you." Avery listed out what she had done, and that wasn't even the end of it. Catalina cried more. You're blaming me for things I didn't even do because you're a boy! Men always do this! Avery looked stumped. What does my birth gender have anything to do with this shit? Avery's response seemed to make Catalina even more upset.
Well, you're just going to come crawling back to me, like always,
she said, proud of her words. I will not! I hate you! I don't know why I even loved you in the first place! He shouted at her. That made her extremely upset. She cried and wailed loudly. People started to stare, and as most assuming, Avery was in the wrong. A man with black hair and blue eyes and glasses was amongst the crowd of people staring at the two fight as well. He wore a sophisticated suit and tie. He seemed interested in the drama and wondered if he should pull the two apart before things got violent. Which is what he assumed might happen. Catalina was the one who attacked Avery first. Though her hit was weak, it infuriated Avery. He raised a hand, but it stopped in his tracks. Pain flickered across Avery's face as a few awkward seconds dragged on. Then a man with slick back hair quickly approached and seized Avery's wrist, preventing any act of retaliation. He understood it was purely self-defense and recognized how it might appear to others, not wanting Avery to face any consequences. Normally, Avery wouldn't be driven to harm anyone, especially not his girlfriend, so he likely wouldn't have followed through even if he had raised his hand. Though he meant no harm, onlookers interpreted it differently. Catalina, aware of this misperception, seemed frustrated that someone intervened. She wanted to see him get into deeper trouble. Avery's face scrunched up a bit, and he stepped back startled. Who the fuck are you? Don't touch me! Avery pulled his wrist away, but the man kept looking at him in pure curiosity. The curious man noticed Avery's trembling hands. Catalina was still crying and pointing. Acting like a victim, Avery clenched his fists. The man in black continued to examine Avery. Avery thought about beating up the black-haired guy for getting in the way, but realized how much stronger the other man looked. Usually that wouldn't stop him, but he didn't want to risk his life for this bullshit. Avery glared at Catalina before dragging his feet and walking away. He felt sick to his stomach. When he looked away from Catalina, his eyes stung with tears again. He scrunched up his face. Hello. He had an accent. A Dutch accent. It wasn't quite noticeable, though. If you had listened hard enough, you'd definitely hear it. Besides that, he was a bit creeped out on how the man was following him right now. Not that he had anywhere to go at the moment. Avery didn't speak Dutch that often, and Avery's own accent is hardly even noticeable other than when he's irritated, and he glared at the man. What the fuck do you want? What's your name? The man asked. What's your name? Finley. Finley Abel. He smiled. Avery scoffed. Why should I tell you who I am? Just curious. Finley's eyes, like dark blue pools of water, looked mysterious and peculiar. It reminded Avery of his own peculiar eyes. I'm Avery. Avery didn't bother telling his last name. Finley kept looking as if he was examining Avery's emotions and reading his mind. Avery took his leave, walking away pissed. There was something strange about Finley, but Avery couldn't tell exactly what it was. A loud, childish wail came from the distance. Ray! Don't leave me! I love you! Catalina was on her knees, extending her hand as if trying to grab onto Avery once more. If she had an arm that was over 100 meters, she'd definitely be able to grab him. She appeared and sounded pathetic, Avery thought, as he struggled to muster any hatred for her in his mind. Finley's eyes were still glued onto Avery. Whilst Avery kept walking, he glimpsed at his watch, something he does as muscle memory. "Shit!" he cursed under his breath, hurrying to his job. Catalina suddenly looked resentful, as if she was going to get revenge against Avery for breaking up with her. Avery walked back up to his apartment, dragging his feet. He had no friends, no girlfriend, and no parents to make proud. They were already disappointed in him enough. Everything is going exactly as he wanted, but he didn't think too long about it. He reflected on Catalina's reaction and the tears she shed, the memory stirring a sense of frustration within him. In the past, he might have found himself comforting her, apologizing, and returning to her side, but he knew he was different now. He opened the fridge, and there was no food, although there were a variety of drinks. Some water, some flavored water, juice, and beer. Avery didn't have a problem with drinking anything. It was just food he had an issue with. Avery grabbed a beer and lay down on his sofa. Moosh, his dog, jumped onto the sofa and laid down with his paws on his chest, like he was making sure his heart was still beating. Avery sighed and pet Moosh on the head. Her floppy ears slightly twitched as he pet her, tail wagging. Avery felt sad when he saw her, so happy to be with her. "Who am I going to give you when my time is up?" Avery didn't want to get very emotional right now. He looked over the piece of paper on his coffee table. It was a bucket list of a few things he wanted to do before he kicked the bucket. It was a short list, but he marked one of the objectives off, which was cut off all relationships, which he had just done. Moosh seemed to sense Avery's pain and sadness. In return, she was sad as well, wanting to help her poor owner. Avery relaxed on his sofa and snuggled with his dog. He felt more at ease, and his aching pain started to go away. He didn't feel hungry either. He liked feeling at ease in these moments. The past few days were probably the worst days of his life. Avery drank a beer and lost himself. He was told by his doctors to strictly stay away from alcohol, but he didn't care. He didn't drink that often anyways. Besides, this was the last beer in the fridge, and he wouldn't have the money to buy more packs. He decided to finally look through his messages on his phone. "Yo, Avery, it been a long time. Wanna catch over some beer?" "Nuh-uh."
Would you like to block Silas? If you block this person, you won't be able to see their messages and they won't be able to see yours. Yes or no?
He selected yes without a hesitation. His mind raced for a while once he set his phone away. It wasn't long before he realized, once he's gone, the hopes and dreams he's always been wanting to reach are shattered. He didn't have anybody to lean on, nobody to talk to, and nobody to look forward to seeing. Leaning on somebody made him feel vulnerable. He hated being vulnerable. He hated it when he cried, and he hates feeling weak. He rubbed his eyes, hands slightly wetting. Moosh could sense his sadness. She licked his face, causing him to chuckle lightly. This chuckle was also to the irony of everything. His friends are gone, his parents are disappointed, and the doctors think he's crazy. He had nothing else to lose, and he could finally throw his life away without bearing the guilt. Wanting to get his mind off things, he grabbed his earbuds that he randomly found on the table and blasted MSI. He just wanted to get his mind off of things, especially everything that happened that day. Moosh started barking, and Avery groaned as he took his earbuds out. Somebody was knocking on his door. His tipsiness made him extra pissed. "It's Tuesday, right?" he mumbled as he staggered to his feet. He felt lightheaded, as if he was going to pass out. He slowly walked over and opened the door. "Go away, Lee." Avery shot daggers with his eyes at the shorter man, trying to get him away. "Pizza delivery!" Lee wasn't a pizza delivery man. "I didn't order pizza." Avery said this every time this happens. "Come on, neighbor. You should eat pizza with me and the others." Lee smiled brightly, almost blinding Avery with all its glory. Avery could only frown. I hate you. You understand? Leave me the fuck alone. Lee frowned. Oh, man. Lee walked away with his pizza box, but he didn't take Avery's words seriously. Avery slammed the door shut and flopped onto his own bed, sighing in pure annoyance. He felt better when he was laying down in bed. He checked his phone and saw that he had 2 voicemails. He clicked on the first one, and it was a woman's voice. His mother's voice. Hey, Avery, me and Dad think you really shouldn't drop out. We are worried about your health. Avery, you better be joking, or I swear I'll fly to America and strangle you!
Honey, calm down. He's our son.
He's a fucking disappointment! Avery continued to listen to the voicemail of his parents going back and forth until it abruptly ended. He felt even more annoyed. He saw the second voicemail was from his now ex-girlfriend. He clicked on it, anyway. It was a short voicemail of her begging him to come back, which made Avery scrunch up his face again. In the voicemail, she mentioned threatening to tell all his friends ridiculous lies about him. He threw his phone against the wall and rolled over, closing his eyes. Moosh walked over and laid her head on the edge of the bed, looking at Avery with a whimper. Avery opened his eyes and swung his legs over the side of the bed, springing up from his bed. His heart raced and the dizziness washed over him as he stood up too quickly, teetering on the edge of fainting. Thankfully, he managed to steady himself. He walked into the kitchen and poured what little food was left in Moosh's bowl. Moosh looked up at him, wondering why there was such little kibble. Avery looked back at her with a sad frown. I'm sorry, girl. I'll go out and get you some more. He pet her head, and she started to wag her tail a bit. It was like she seemed to understand Avery's situation and cherished the kibble she had, aka devoured it. After half an hour, Avery picked up his phone again, deciding to text Catalina. He wanted to tell her that he didn't care what she did, and that he wasn't going back to her. Catalina has always been cruel, making Avery feel like he was losing his mind, even though he knew he was just a little off. He tried to take a nap, but couldn't seem to rest. Instead, Avery opened his laptop and started to play crappy knockoff games. He didn't know how much time passed, but the sky seemed to darken. Avery flinched as he heard a loud knock on his door. Moosh barking loudly. Was it his girlfriend, the landlord, or maybe Silas? Or did Lee come back to annoy him? Avery groaned. No one's home. I know you're in there, dickhead! We need to talk! Silas yelled at the other side of the door. Avery knew this would end in shouting, but if Silas was drunk and high, then this would end in violence. Avery slowly walked to the door, making sure Moosh was out of the way before opening it. What he saw was a very not-sober Silas, and quickly tried to close the door. Silas, pissed, gripped the edge of the door and pried it back open. Holy fuck, he cursed. He's like Superman when he's on drugs. Silas shoved at Avery and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. Avery, having no choice, tried to squirm out of his grip. Silas tightly grabbed onto his neck, choking him. Moosh started barking in worry. Avery gasped for breath. Silas, this isn't you. It's the alcohol and the drugs. I'm sorry for breaking your mother's urn. Avery dug his fingers into Silas's arm, causing Silas to bleed. The air filled with the smell of Silas's weed and alcohol. Silas squeezed tighter. Avery started to feel lightheaded. Moosh finally took action and bit Silas's calves. He yelped and threw Avery onto the floor, arm hitting onto the ground. Avery bit his lip, arm burning. Why does hitting your funny bone hurt instead of feeling kind of funny? It doesn't make sense. It's a funny bone, for God's sake. Avery coughed, vision blurry. He felt dizzy and weak. His entire body was aching and trembling. He couldn't tell what was happening, but he heard Moosh whimper before smelling the metallic stench of blood. Those were the last things he could sense before he fell unconscious.